morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Museum for Art in Wood to see the first official opening day of BA Harrington's Suite Américaine and the second month of Viola Bordon's Muliebrity. We have brought both artists here today to have a little conversation about their work, and they're going to share with you some insights today, and then we're going to gather together for a little chat at the end. So, and then you're free to roam about the exhibitions. So we're going to start with Viola. It's all yours. With a lot of thoughts about faith and the way that functions in life. I think that has been kind of an idea that I'm circling around. I really like ideas of faith, ideas of politics, ideas of things that like really impact us as people. And this is the first kind of quilt I ever made to be shown, and this is called One to Wear, One to Wash, One to Mend. And it's based off of Mother Teresa and thinking about her Sisters of Charity, Mother Teresa. My parents were missionaries, so we lived about 2 blocks away from her Sisters of Charity in Calcutta for a long time when I was really little. And she was an interesting figure to me. She took on white as the color of widows, but she also, in her person, embodied kind of the perfection of a mother, of a widow, and of kind of a virgin because she was a nun. And all of these were entirely desexualized ways of thinking of a woman. And so thinking about her and her legacy, I made this quilt. And it was a really interesting starting off point for me, because it ended up taking a really long time and getting me really familiar with kind of hand quilting and some of the handwork that's involved. It's all hand sewn, and so it ended up taking far too long to just make kind of a big, vast white surface, which led me into kind of my next work. This is, obviously you guys probably recognize this, it's January 6th. I finished that quilt probably in December, and then this happened in January. And I, again, thinking about faith in these spaces, saw this as an entirely opposite expression, with this idea that Jesus and Trump are equated, and I started to dig into the history of this movement and thinking about the white Christian nationalism that is really like taking hold of our country and how faith is used within that movement. I started to look into the history of it, and this is not the history of that, this is a kind of separate history. This is a Civil War quilt that is from 1863 at the Smithsonian. This pattern is kind of a star pattern. Some people call it the North Star. It's called a lot of different things. But this one was made during the Civil War, and this is a quote kind of inscribed by the person who made it that was like, "Bring it back to me if it survives the war." And it was made for a soldier that would then, if they died, pass it on to someone else who needed it, and kind of share these resources and these quilts and these handmade things. And thinking of our capital being overthrown, this this quilt became really central for me. And so then I made this one, which is on view around the corner. And it's a reflection kind of both of these situations and both of these ideas. And a little bit me trying to process what was happening and what was going through. Let's Make America Great Again was Ronald Reagan's slogan in the 1980s. When he got elected, it was the first time the religious right and the political right joined together and formed one unit that was a voting bloc. Before that, Christians were kind of all over the board with where they voted, and there wasn't this like evangelical push towards a certain vote. And he took the idea, or the 2016 election, took let's out of the conversation, so it was just Make America Great Again. And this communal action disappeared from it. And it was, just this weird thing. So I took kind of a star pattern and repeated it over a landscape, and that felt right to me. This kind of, again, is also how Jews talk about the Holocaust when they think about never again. And I think this idea of kind of this heavy-handed power and the abuses that come with it again and again and again became a thought that I really held on to. I used buttons to quilt this along with hand quilting. It was the first time I'd ever used buttons for them, and I always thought that I would add something to it at some point, and I didn't know what, but the buttons were there to like have access to it. And so I was thrilled to be able to show it here and have this discussion about how to show it and how to use it. And the buttons came back around, and we had the discussion of what if we let people add whatever they want to buttons. And so the quilt that you see around the corner now is almost entirely, all of the text on it is entirely blocked off by people's writing and people's additions to it. It feels like this movement has allowed us to bring the let's back into it, and this communal movement and communal action has been really encouraging for me over this time period. It also feels like the right time to be showing this quilt and to be having this discussion. This is in the making. I had an interesting time trying to find a way to get a hold of enough shirts without supporting something that I really didn't want to support. That was a whole nother thing. But these are those two quilts kind of shown side by side, thinking of the contrast between them. This is a damier drawing that I was really impacted by a little while later. Damier lived right after I think it was the Second French Revolution. Part of what instigated that was a law that sacrilege was punishable by death. And so this idea of speaking against the sacred would get you killed. And although it was never kind of enacted to that degree, this kind of church-state relationship is something that I keep thinking about. So Damier, shortly after that, painted this, or drew this, and I always thought it was strange because it is a cross structure with a carcass upside down on this cross structure. And I don't know what he was thinking when he drew this, but the timing of those two things always felt really intense to me. And so I made this quilt as kind of a response to it. And it's a baby quilt. It's 40 by 40, so it's quite small compared to some of the other ones, or the other two that I've shown. But it felt like it was in this meditation on relationship between power and faith and where those things sit. It felt like a really prominent thought that I kept having. That's all embroidery. And this was another one in that series. It was text taken from an evangelical marriage conference. It was a handout as to kind of making the argument as to why husbands and wives should permanently sign over consent to one another, and kind of always be available to sexually satisfy the other, which again is such a strange kind of thought for people outside of those settings. but something that I had come across in a way that like wasn't so strange. But this idea of the arguments why were something that I put on this quilt. So yeah. Mostly I work with found materials and secondhand materials and things like that. So all of this was, but then I was able to like embroider it and then bleach it and then play with it enough that it had its own thing. I became obsessed with stripes after that as a departure, where I just started thinking about what they do to your head when you try to look at them, and then they start kind of playing with your mind, and had a lot of fun with some of those, which led me into like the last year or so. And I started thinking of, again, national symbols in the way that I keep thinking of these symbols and structures, and thinking about the idea of flags and the ways in which they move and are manipulated by the wind, and the idea that weather is a really good analogy and a really good way to discuss movement and power and forces that are that great. Yeah, so the idea that our national identity can move with the wind as quickly became prominent as well. The blue of this is a hand-dyed, hand-woven, really, really beautiful piece of fabric, and the red and white stripes is actually the same fabric that was there, and it's like a like block printed. It's like dyed on one side but not on the other, so it doesn't end up not a block print. It's a kind of almost like a screen print fabric. So this one will be at the Clay Studio as part of the Radical Americana piece. This when I got invited to Radical Americana, I got to do some research at the Pennsylvania Historical Society here in Philadelphia. In doing that research, I came across this, which is not blowing up really well, but Liberty, the Fair Maid of Kansas, in the Hands of Border Ruffians. It was a political satire cartoon that was circulated after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, when there was a lot of violence on the border, pushing for the expansion of the United States and some of those ideas. And so the quilt that I actually have up in the corner, I was struggling to figure out the posture of Liberty and how to hold her, and this idea of a woman, and how do you depict one, and there's so many things alongside that. And this piece was kind of my breakthrough in finding that, this like kneeling Liberty, where from kneeling there can be a lot of implications for how and why you're kneeling, but the hunch was really lovely. There's also these tiny drawings along the back that I ended up incorporating into the quilt going down the two legs of the stars. So there are these kind of military guys on horses with flags and bayonets, and then also a large a trail of covered wagons as well, both thinking of kind of different violences of American expansion. Yeah, so kind of thinking of all of those things, when invited to Radical Americana, I was given the opportunity to think about something in relation to American history, and I was really interested in the idea of liberty being adopted as a kind of symbol of American identity from France before women could vote, and this kind of irony of having liberty as someone who would not have kind of equal rights became this kind of recurring thing. And so I started thinking about the way women are portrayed and the ways in which that undermines kind of power structures that they have and power that they hold. And so I started to equate kind of Mary Magdalene with liberty in a lot of ways when I started thinking about these. Mary Magdalene is a great kind of hero in the biblical narrative, and someone who in art history is often portrayed as a naked woman in the wilderness. And these back and forth of that, like, it's just this weird thing in the way that she's moved through pop culture. And so this idea of being naked in the wilderness also became a really interesting idea when thinking about this book of what is wilderness, how do we engage wilderness, and think about it around kind of American identity, and how do we think about it in spaces. So that started a lot of the thoughts around camouflage that ended up in the quilt, and thinking about the violence on women's bodies and the violence of space, and all of those things kind of being able to collapse a lot of these ideas into camo made a lot of sense to me. But along with that, I got the opportunity to work with BA, and I don't know if you'll talk more about this, but we ended up with this piece here in the corner that I don't have images of yet. But we found that we were thinking of a lot of different ideas about women, and also about craft, and also about care, and a lot of those things kind of piling up on one another. And I had these weird cowboy-themed pillowcases, and I was like, how do we start to play with some of these ideas? And that construction came out of it. But this is the one that is around the corner. And then I'm just gonna briefly skim through some of my other outdoor work that doesn't necessarily have to do with my quilting, but it's kind of, I have these two practices that come together and move apart in different ways. I like to play with materials a lot in that. So these are pillars of salt. There's no scaffolding but salt on the cotton fabric. And so they led to this large outdoor piece I did at a salt flat with a friend, where we built this structure that could, the idea was to build something that could eventually hold itself up. And it was a bit lofty, and we never got that far, but it ended up being this really cool intervention in the space of the salt flats. This is a work I did in a church in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, where I filled the space with yellow vinyl that just, that would interrupt the space. This is a large outdoor installation I was able to do in 2024 in Nepal, which was really exciting for me. I was thinking a lot about invasives and native kind of relationship. So this is an invasive species and a native plant that's being pushed out in the same weaving, and it's at a museum for Nepali history that was built by a foreign architect, funded by foreign dollars because of tourism. And there's this kind of back and forth where I was thinking with the museum about the space and the funding, and thinking about the national park space, because that's where we harvested all our materials from, and working with a group of weavers who were never invited to show at this museum, but I was, so by pulling them in, we could start to have this like interesting dialogue about whose space it was. And so I'm interested in some of these kind of outdoor woven fiber works that work very differently than quilting, but use a lot of the same mechanisms. And then this is a wrap drop place in here. So that's
experience participating in the Radical Americana programming and meeting Viola through that, and how exciting that has been, and then also some of the other collaboration that was inspired by the opportunity to have this exhibition here and participate in the celebration of American craft and the history of American craft as part of the celebration of the centennial. Because I was having a hard time finding other things about celebrating the relationship. But this has been amazing. So my practice has always, my art practice has always involved a lot of historical research. In fact, when I was doing my MFA, my Master of Fine Arts in Wood at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with Tom Loser, what I started working on as artwork in the studio involved so much historical research that I ended up staying on and adding a master's in art history. And I did not know that that's where my work would end up. When I started pursuing wood in an art context, I'm very traditionally trained in woodworking. I have a trade diploma from the North Bennett Street School in Boston, which is the oldest trade school in the country. So I learned to build furniture by looking at sort of 17th through 19th century early American and European forms, studying those forms, pretty much making exact reproductions of them as a way to learn furniture. North Bennett Street is not an art school, it's not a design school. Most of the people come out of there doing period furniture. So when I did go to art school, when finally I was at the point where I was going to shift this medium of wood into the art world, I had a background in art. My undergrad was in studio art, and I was focused in textiles. A little history of that: all the men in my family were carpenters. My grandfather, my father, my 3 older brothers were all taught carpentry skills. It didn't occur to anyone that the daughter might want some carpentry skills too. So anyway, I sort of came in through the back door, but I still felt this sense of inheritance through my family, but I took it to a different level. I went into fine woodworking, and I knew that eventually I would take it into the art world. So in grad school then, right, you have to take art history classes and stuff, and I took early American decorative arts. And that was a pivotal thing for me because I was now looking at and studying these furniture forms that were very familiar to me from North Bennett Street School, but at North Bennett Street School, I was looking at Hadley chests just to figure out how to build them and stuff, and learning a little bit of the history, a little bit about style and stuff, but not at all. Like, I didn't even know, I think, when I first encountered those forms, that they were made as dowry chests for young women. So then so now these forms that I had looked at, learning to build furniture and measured and drew and everything, and figured out the joinery and stuff. Now I'm like, oh wow, now I'm learning about the historical and social context of them, and in particular, like with the dowry chest, Hadley chest, their relation to women's lives, and then starting to understand, so much more about that. So the 3 forms so most of my early work was all, I did a whole lot of work related to the dowry chest. I don't know how many pieces in that form I did, but then I eventually added a couple of other early American forms that were designed specifically for use by women. So chronologically then, the ladies' writing desk, from the Queen Anne period, and then eventually the ladies' work table from sort of the federal period, which are these spectacular, petite little tables, most of which had a fabric sack drawer that was attached to a frame and pulled out like a drawer so a lady could do light needlework, like in the company of, visitor, in company. Anyway, so those forms became then the focus of the work in this exhibition. Is basically those work related to those 3 forms. So here are the Hadley chests. The Hadley chests are, some scholars consider this the first American vernacular furniture form. So there are about 100 or more of these chests that have been found and identified. And they're very peculiar. The carving on the front is quite crude compared to a lot of the other chests. It's not really chip carving, it's more like scratch carving. And they were built from about 1650 to 1725, so a long period of time to have this very definitive style changed very little for generations of joiners, all coming from the same region, all taking a very similar form. 3 panels across the front, lidded chest, maybe a drawer occasionally too. But the other really fundamental thing about them is this carving that covers the fronts, probably coming out of 6 different shops, but very similar pattern, this tulip and leaf pattern. Okay, so here's an example of some of those. Many of them are initialed, presumably the initials of the young woman for whom they were made. This would have been her father's, maybe because they were made when these girls were young, probably. So, but because these chests were passed down through female lineages, but females didn't own property, so they were made the property of men, recorded in probate records written by men, we've, for the most part, lost track of whose initials those are. So a few of them we know because they stayed in the family of the joiner who made the chest, or a daughter, say. But that kind of stuff just became fascinating to me. And these chests started also sort of representing to me the ephemeral nature of women's lives and women's work, and the anonymous nature of women's lives. You know, women didn't have time to write diaries and document things and stuff. So, and these chests stand in museums and collections today empty, right? 300 years later, empty. But to me, that emptiness became, conceptually thinking about them sort of full of what was lost, what was not there, the undocumented, the untold stories and histories of women. And so that's what really started. And also, to this day, most of the historical scholarship around furniture in these forms is still preoccupied with the male production of the forms, right? Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, social historian, Harvard professor, was one of the first people to pay attention to these chests among other items and connect them to women's lives and the use of this material culture by women, which was what I became really fascinated with. And then thinking of just that history of chests, so other things that I would research and write about, think about, these are the Italian Cassone wedding chests that were actually, so these also were about the exchange of women from one male-headed household to another. These were, an Italian Renaissance, so high, elite families. There would be a wedding processional through the streets with these chests carried through the streets holding a woman's trousseau from her house of origin, her father's house, to her new husband's house. And what else? What other kind of ceremony marches through the streets carrying a chest like this? So I started also relating this to the idea of, women's identity is sort of that, the death of identity, almost, anyway, thinking through things like that. And then also, we don't have the dowry institution in this country anymore, but we certainly have remnants of it. And a lot of my students that are here with me today probably didn't grow up with a hope chest, but others of us, that idea of women having a hope chest preparing for marriage, right? So these are just a few examples of the laying hope chest of us. So that, that tradition, we still have remnants of these things in our, related to what Viola has been talking about. Yeah, a lot of us don't recognize or don't know, but that Puritan, that patriarchal system is still so prevalent in our policy, in our social structure, and so thinking about these things. So fortunately, the Chipstone Foundation in Milwaukee has one of the Hadley chests that I could spend a lot of time with. It's the RD chest. You can see maybe Rebecca Dickinson, we're not sure. But this one also, amongst all of these chests with all of this very, very similar carving, this one chest has in the middle these real, so this you can see with the, I put these into her, has these 3 figures carved in the center. Some of the other chests have something else carved, a geometric shape or something, but this one has these figures. And for me, it's like, wow, those are crazy. Look at those crazy little tentacles. And anyway, I just was fascinated by this. And the scholarship on the Hadley chest was kind of done and over with in the 80s. Maybe a few people did a lot of work on these, and then we kind of put them to rest, along with all the mysteries around them, like what influenced that carving, that quirky carved pattern. And then too, in all the scholarship that's put there, I barely found any mention, barely, just a little bit, oh, one of the chests has some figure-like things on it. I'm like, those are crazy, fascinating. And I started this essay and then put it down, but what I want to suggest is, these were made in Western Massachusetts, around the Hadley-Hatfield area. These people had left Boston and moved further west to be free, to do their own thing, and they were fur traders. So they were trading with the Algonquin, the indigenous. So I am suggesting a Native American or indigenous influence on this carving. I don't know if I'll ever find, something to prove that, but and how cool, how amazing if what we consider one of the first vernacular American furniture styles was actually influenced by indigenous culture. So anyway, and then there's a way that I interpret these three figures as representing family, and the one on the top one you see with that's decapitated there, because I wasn't sure what it, I was really taking a picture of the structure of the chest and the inside, and then when I saw it on my computer, I was like, whoa, and there are these splayed legs and this big open cavity, and then the little baby figure that's not even fully developed underneath there. So I started reading that as the female figure, and then started thinking about, so I wrote an essay about these chests and interpreting those figures and relating it to childbirth as women's major role in colonial America, and the precarious nature of childbirth and women facing childbirth, knowing they might not make it, like men going off to war, that kind of stuff. And so one of the first collaborations I did, which is with a friend, Shel Isaac, who's a video and sound artist. And so I asked her to create this video that I could project on these chests. And the video is an animation that she created from my drawings for the embroidery that's on the chest in the back there. And I mean, if you look closely at that, you'll see just using the motifs that were carved on the chest, she creates a birth canal and all this stuff in this baby style. So that's my interpretation of those chests. But that's what led me to start thinking about more about women's roles during this time, women's work, the needlework that would have been stored in these chests, in the Hadley chest. So I'm looking at that needlework pocket, which influenced Viola and I's piece here. So men's clothing had pockets before women's clothing did. And so women would sew these pockets. They were sewed to strings, and they'd strap them around their waist under the skirts, right? But oh my God, look at that thing, that slit coming down. And then this one that I could find, someone must have just seen a hot air balloon for the first time. But whoa, what, like, So, but I can't just walk away from that stuff. To me, that's what makes all this stuff come alive, right? It's like, wow. Samplers, all these samplers that young girls were stitching, right, to in school, right, to learn the alphabet, to learn numbers, counting, also to become good Puritan girls who would then be mothers, so all these verses, the same verses stitched over and over again about virtue, duty to God and man, right? And also facing an early grave, perhaps, right? So preparing women for this sacrifice, preparing girls for this sacrifice that would have to make, right? So I'm looking at that. Also, Anne Bradstreet, English immigrant, who was actually the first published American poet, was a woman. And this is, this is called, after on the, anyway, it was written right before the birth of one of the children. And I did the research to figure out it wasn't one of her first children, so it wasn't, oh my God, I've never done this before. And it wasn't one of her last children, I don't know if she had 8 or 9 or something, so it wasn't when she was a lot older, it was right in the middle. And this is a poem that she's saying goodbye to her husband in case she dies. And that reality is so present in her mind that she even goes so far as to ask him that if I do die, assuming he would remarry them, please protect my children from their stepmother. Okay, I'm like, wow, okay, this is, and then very few diaries from women. You see diaries from men where they're like, okay, my wife, I have a living wife still and a living child, right? But here was one from one of the few women's diaries again. The Lord appeared and made me the living mother of another living child, right? So that idea of not making it through this. And then also thinking of the Puritan ideology, of this culture and the people who were creating these objects and referencing and stuff. So from Pilgrim pastor John Robinson, who remained in England with the Puritans here, were very influenced. This idea that the pain of labor, of women's labor, which was often called travail, the French word for labor, right? But this was laid on women, not men, because what? Because Eve was the first to sin. And then Eve tempted Adam with the apple, right? And I know, even though no one ever said that to me, I was still aware of that ideology in my evangelical Christian upbringing. So anyway, but I think of what I'm doing with my work as a kind of reclamation of these forms, and the reiteration of them as well. And I love that we can use, so Jules Brown, one of the first material culture scholars, sort of the grandfather of that genre of study, of that being actually a discipline that we study now, talks about objects as these a special resource. They are primary resources, unlike documents. Objects, material culture was created, conceived of, made, used in the past, but it still exists with us in the present, right? So it's still here with us in the present moment. Unlike ideas written down and documented, they're still present, but it just existed. And then, so I'm just fascinated with the way that material culture and sort of this American history and all this can speak to both the past and the present at the same time, and what it has to say about our collective inherited past, and all the things related to that, all the complicated things, and then ways that we can also, or that I can, through my work, but then hopefully other people as well, make sense of this time. Maybe be somewhat revisionist in our thinking of the past, but also make sense of the present, or think about the present through these. So I basically started playing around with the structure. So what I've done is I've kept the form, the structure of this form sort of fixed, the design, the proportions, and then I play around with the form, and I'm thinking a lot too. Furniture is very human scale. Its parts are named after a lot of our body parts, right? It supports us, we sit on it, we lean on it, we put our clothes and stuff in it. It's very relatable to human scale, as I said. So I think of the forms as, my explorations of the forms as relating to metaphors that can come up. The structure of the form related to our human bodies, especially women's anatomy, and openings and closings and secret spaces and stuff like that. So, but I'm also thinking of it metaphorically as furniture as representing cerebral space. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Gaston Bachelard. What's the name of the book? And anyway, exploring furniture form.
That's for the wedding.
Yes, poetics of space, thank you, Don and Bill. So, yes, exploring metaphors of physical structure, but also, as I mentioned, cerebral space. And you'll see a lot of like openings into other spaces and stuff in the work. And then different ways to present the work. So the stacking came from running out of room in my studio. You remember how small our studios were, Don, right? So I started to build all these Hadley chest forms, and I didn't know where to put them, and so I started stacking them up, and then I was like, ooh, that's interesting. And I also know in museums in the back, in the storage area, they start stacking furniture on top of each other. But it also, the stacking the chest started taking on this almost totemic quality, and I started thinking of generations stacked on each other and inheritance, and especially like female lineages, and then also like this idea of climbing out of, right, pulling yourself up and out of the oppression, whatever, okay, I had to move, right? Okay. Just different versions of them. Okay, so back to these three forms. Also, with the Hadley chest, I was thinking a lot about the oppressive nature of the patriarchy. And then when I started exploring the other forms, I also realized that these were all forms that we were either storing or facilitating women's work. So I started thinking about them differently as the beginnings of a kind of autonomy for women. They all have all these forms have locks on them. I don't know who all had those keys, but you know. And then you hear stories of like, even back in the Renaissance, there's a story of a woman's lover hiding in her clothing. Right? And women, you know, writing letters to their secret lover, but anyway. So I actually started thinking, could these be proto-feminist furniture? Right? And then again, exploring the interiors of those spaces, and I've always been fascinated with the little pigeonhole assembly that's inside of those slant-top desks. They're somewhere between the scale. They're much smaller than the big secretaries built for men that often have bookcases. They're often referred to as diminutive desks, which I find really interesting, that word. But also, so they're kind of like between full-scale furniture and children's furniture. A doll reminds me of dollhouse and children's play, and the way that this play, especially with girls, was a preparation for adult life. So I started, this was the first exploration of the writing desk form. Right, and then this is probably the most, so these stages are, again, based on that writing desk form and that interior space. These are not my fine woodworking. These are made much more quickly out of plywood and painted. Oh my, first time I painted wood, I felt like, it felt like blasphemy. But then I fell in love. I loved it. I loved what I could do with it. And these stages became a lot about memory and passing of time and my adult relationship as a woman to my childhood memories and that kind of play. And eventually then I revisited these pieces, and that interior space became a place to collaborate with other artists. So one of the things that happened with this exhibition for me, collaboration started early on with my friend Shaw. And then some of the pieces, the wedding dress piece and the piece with the quilting here, the fabric components were found components, likely made by women, anonymous women. I don't know who they are, but I feel like I was collaborating with these anonymous women. The wedding dresses came from the 30s and 40s. The quilt remnant, these quilted pieces, hand-stitched, I found in my aunt's basement. We don't know who made them. She claims she did, and I'm still not convinced that it wasn't her. And that started leading me to this idea of more collaborations. And I had done a collaboration with Katie Hunnell, those of you who know her, one of my friends in the furniture making world, whose work is known for kinetic components, like you pull out a drawer and something else opens up, and she had an exhibition here just a year ago. So I invited Katie to make this little piece that when you pull the cord, it unfolds or opens up one of the first things I did after the 2024 election, I had never felt so offended as a woman in my life, and I wasn't quite prepared for that. We had been here before, but there was something different this time, and that morning we woke up and my husband looked at me, he just said, "I'm so sorry." And I really was caught off guard by feeling that way, and I just got my phone out, and I started reaching out to text-wise every woman that was in my phone that had ever meant that I had, ever felt a connection to anyway, and I just said, "I'm thinking of you, and I'm sorry for what's going on, and I just want you to know I'm thinking of you." And two of the people that I reached out to were my friends, dear friends, Janet DeVries and Monica Edwards Larson, who I met 40 years ago when we were finding our way out of this crazy subculture we grew up in, evangelical fundamentalist Christianity, and becoming artists and budding young feminists, and what does that mean, and all of that. And so I reached out. They were two of the people that I reached to, women that I reached out to, and eventually then that reconnection led to this beautiful little artist book that Monica hand-printed and hand-bound, and it includes some drawings of mine, quirky drawings I do of the work, these wine contour drawings, and then drawings that Janet did when we were undergrads back in the 80s, and this poem that she wrote called Apron Lady, that she wrote, we think, in 1985. I don't know, but Apron Lady, all of us, it has stayed with me all this time, and I think it was kind of about suburban housewives or womanhood in suburbia, America, but even back then it had this very apocalyptic tone to it, and so it just felt like a perfect thing. Anyway, there were lots of other, and they're here today, and there were other collaborations. So the sewing table here, the yellow one, the plywood one painted yellow with the quilting, I collaborated with my student Ariel Golden, who probably would have identified herself as a painter prominently until she took my woodworking class. And now I can't get her out of the studio. So I invited her to cover that with this decorative painting, and then she incorporated a little female figure. And then once Viola and I met through this Radical Americana, it was like, yes, of course, we have to collaborate on this last piece. And then there are other collaborations as well. Katie Hugnall, I mentioned, a former graduate student of mine, the beautiful teeny tiny little miniature landscape oil painting. What else? And then so in November last year, the woodworking world had a tragic loss. Sylvie Rosenthal, 45. So one of the stages, the Ofrenda is a posthumous collaboration with Sylvie. I was able to contact her mother and sister, who sent me this beautiful cherry mallet that she had made and carved this eye at the end of it. So Sylvie, it's quirky, and I love the idea that it's a mallet, that it would work. I don't know. It looks like it had been used a little bit. And I turned the interior of the stage into an Ofrenda from the Mexican tradition, Day of the Dead, where they make altars to honor and support and sort of send off the dead, and marigolds are part of that tradition. But I guess that's just a nice way also to end. And I do feel like I collaborated with Navva here on this exhibition, and the just beautiful, stunning way she envisioned this, and her all the intellectual curiosity she took in my my work and what she added to that, and then also all the staff here, Katie and Virtue and all the other staff, and the way Katie and I have talked about, anyway, it's just, it really has felt like such a big collaboration, and I think too gave me something to celebrate on the 250th anniversary of a democracy that, I don't know, is what started as an experiment, so. But, and thinking of the care, the craft is care, and the community that it fosters, and the whole history of women's craft and women's work and the community involved and all that. And then you all coming and we put our work out there and then it comes alive and the meaning that's added to it when you all engage with it. And so I do feel, so this has been really special, and I want to thank you all for this opportunity because it has helped me come out of this despair somewhat. And that's what we're gonna do. We're still here. So, anyway, I think that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. This is on.
Thank you so much, both Viola and BA, for sharing so openly the motivations behind your work and how intertwined they are with your life story and generations that came before you. I had a couple of questions thought through before your talk, and unfortunately you answered a lot of them already preemptively. But how dare you? But I wanted to, one thing that I did want to ask you both to respond to is, first of all, BA, you spoken so generously of the way you took this opportunity as a way to collaborate, reach out to other women who are your colleagues, your peers, your friends, your students, and then your museum staff. And I thought maybe you could both talk a little bit more about the process of your working together with each other, having been introduced through this project and through Radical Americana. And that was not an assumption that any of us had made, but you kind of hit it off for a number of reasons. Maybe you'll enlighten us.
That was it felt very serendipitous, I think, when we first talked, you were like, so the other artist showing at the same time, you're gonna love her, you're gonna love her. And then we got introduced, and over Zoom, we just started talking, and it was like we were pinging back and forth of like, oh, and this thing, and oh, that thing, and I feel like it felt like we knew each other for much longer than that Zoom conversation. And then it just started where you suggested, you were like, I have this chest and I don't know what or this piece of furniture, and I don't know what the next thing is, but there's something else that needs to go with it. Would you be interested in making it? So that was your suggestion. And then it was a question of like, how big and what are the dimensions and what, like a lot of those things before we ever got to content.
Yeah, it did feel very serendipitous, and it's also, it was, so in case you can't tell, I'm quite a bit older than Viola. So there's also this, for me, this cool intergenerational thing happening, and then the interest in traditional craft, and that I had already started bringing my textile background in sort of through the back door, which was really lovely when I was able to do that and in my work. And yeah, once I met Viola and I had this piece that hadn't been fully conceptualized yet, it needed the fabric component, and she was just like, well, this has to happen. If she's up for this, this has to happen. And then it was that back and forth, throwing ideas out there, letting them simmer a little bit, coming back to it, and then I had these pillowcases. And I was already open to working with them, but I have these pillowcases with this cowboy thing, and it was like, yes. Pillowcases that also had a ruffle, so they were these great, they all already looked sort of apron-like, and it just, and then the back and forth, and those of you who are artists, or, we're all of us do creative things on similar, so just even though, I know working with other people there's something really special about that exchange of ideas, and then light bulbs going off, and then what about this, or that, it's vulnerable, right? You make yourself vulnerable, because Viola had to say, I have these crazy pillowcases with cowboys on them. You have to what about this? And I may have said, oh my God, no. But
when we started with the pocket was the first thing that happened, and BA was like, I've been thinking about the structure of skirts, I've been thinking about how women hold things, here are these weird pockets, and so we immediately were like, we need a pocket on whatever it is, and then we started talking about what if instead of open, it's like a closed thing, and how do we carry things, and so we were kind of back and forth, and then we didn't hit the motif yet. We were still like, there's something where we need content or something. And then the idea of cowboys, both of us were instantly in it. This classically American macho kind of idea and form, and putting that on a quilted something just felt right.
right, and there's so much around the mythology of the American West, and manifest destiny, and all this crazy. But then there's also, there's the whole queer radio culture. And it just seemed to eventually then, I don't know what the right word is, but the layers of what that thing does was pretty amazing. And then it also fit in with some of the sort of surreal aspects of some of the work, and and then even just the title, by the time we got around to having to title it, I was pretty stressed, because it was getting closer and closer to the installation time, and I felt like my brain doesn't have any more room to do this kind of thinking. But that's the other thing about working with other people and collaborating is, we threw ideas out there, we were both looking up cowboy slang and stuff, and then we had a conversation, and then it continued with text, and until it felt right.
Until we landed on Calamity Betsy, the Alboy Buckaroo, which is one of the best titles I think I've ever
This is an auspicious year, and that's how the Clay Studio gathered us together, 45 different institutions in Philadelphia, to come together, convene, and open spaces up to artists. And so you are both, and these projects are both part of this discussion that's taking place this summer. There is an expectation there will be a lot of visitors with this 250-year marking in mind when they visit our cultural institutions. What would you like them to take away from these inquiries that you followed here?
for me, there's an element where being an American is a complicated thing. And I think that our own relationships with our own histories, our own relationships with our neighbors, you know, like all of those can be really complicated things. And I think sitting and wading through the complicated nature of that is part of what this country like has the potential to just be incredible at, is to be like, hey, like we come from messed up places, we are messed up people, and yet like I can love my neighbor. And I think that we have an incredible opportunity to do that as a country. Yeah, so I think that not shying away or pretending like this isn't our past, or this isn't where we are currently, and yet you get to choose your own, to make your own choices in your own life. And I feel like to clock that we haven't started on yet feels really important for me.
I think to someone recently, another artist that's shown here in the online conversation you did around the last group exhibition that was here related to the past, craft, made a comment about craft, making things and the interest that can be created around that idea with people from totally diverse backgrounds who may disagree with each other about many things. The craft, the hand, you know, something has this way of, I think they use the term democratizing that, and I guess I would hope that, I mean, there are a lot of words up here. There's a lot of didactic stuff here for people to read to sort of inform them about where this is coming from. But I guess I would hope that the objects, the materials, the hand, the human hand, I mean, this is one of the things that art does for us, right? It brings us together with the visual and the tangible material in our presence in a very different way than words do. I mean, I don't know, can we say objects don't lie, or the way words do? That gives us access to a connection with each other that can happen sort of, I don't know if we would say underneath, or if we would say above. All of that other stuff. So I guess I'm hoping that the objects, the material, the evidence of the hand can provide a space where some of our, you know, preconceived notions, our biases, the baggage that we all bring with us based on our own personal history, but also the collective history of this country, where that can kind of put it aside and we can experience
for a second, let you. I think for me the movement towards sewing was something that was forced during the pandemic because I didn't have access to studio space, and that was a moment for me of realization and like a very aha moment in my practice when I pulled out my grandmother's machine and started doing that. And for me, there's something like quilting has always felt like a safe but predominantly feminine space, and that medium is a medium of care towards someone else. It's a medium born out of like poverty and a lack that is just this gloriously beautiful expression of care for your child, your sister, your neighbor, your whoever it is. I also, my family is from Lancaster County originally, and so the idea of like Mennonite quilting groups and things like that are these closed feminine spaces in these like larger institutions that are predominantly run by men. I think there's something of quilting that pulls at the feminine just because it's a tradition that was formed kind of in those spaces in a way that there's not a lot of traditions globally that have been formed in predominantly female spaces in quite the same way. So I always feel like that is just an inherent thing, and I don't know if I've excavated it so much as beginning to live inside of it in a way that's really life-giving for me.
That's kind of an interesting question for me, and it's changed a lot over the last decade and more. Initially my skills were so identified with my father and woodworking skills. To the point where I had feelings of guilt with my mother for being so identified with my father. And my father, I would say, as a man, had quite developed feminine attributes, things that anyway, that's a complicated family history, personal history that I don't need to get into. But so, yeah, the textiles coming back in was a way that the feminine became more pronounced or back in. But for me, what was more interesting is the sort of the back and forth and the crossing those gender boundaries and kind of being fluid in and out of them. And one really important moment for me was the wooden chest in the back that has the embroidered linen cover over it. And I told some people this story. I had an argument with my woodworking professor at UW-Madison. At that time, I was now doing my master's in art history, and I had been asked to make work for this exhibition at the Milwaukee Art Museum that Chipstone was doing, 3 artists, and I had the idea for this piece, and Tom Losman, the professor, said, "BA, you don't have time to do all of this. I'm doing my art history master too." And he said, we'll find a seamstress. Someone else has to do the sewing. And he was like, "Do you know how to embroider?" And I was like, "No, but I could, And he was really pushing that, and I was like, and I knew, like, no, I have to do both. Like, not just because as an artist it's hard to relinquish that control, but I just knew I had to do both things. My hands had to be the hands that did the, woodworking. It's a traditionally male trade, right? And well, now I bet more of the women, more of the woodworking faculty across the country are women than men, and students. But still, I knew I had to do it. So
my hands both did the woodworking, did the stitching, and I also had a super real crisis personally between the linen and the wood. And when I first sewed the linen, I was like, oh my God, the seams aren't straight. Is it just basic sewing, straight seam? Because what counts as straight in wood, cut on a saw, with a fence parallel to the blade, is straight. Fabric's not that way. And I was freaking out. I had to take this linen thing I made to the little fabric store in Madison with the women who had helped me tune up my great aunt's Singer Featherweight machine that I sewed that on. And I was like, and they were like, what are you talking about? This is fun, this is perfect, this is fun. And then I realized, there was this tension in the actual object, both the historical piece, but then also the new piece that I made between the masculine and the feminine, and my own identity, and my family history, and all of that. And so that was, but thank you for that idea of excavating feminine. I love that.
Also because it's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, as a, older male, this is great. And the question about excavating feminine, how do I find a place in that conversation? And I think what you just said, BA, is really something about excavating a human in regards to nature. And there's something I've been sitting here thinking about, the piece which deeply moves me is the oak chose. And it's because it is material that this form emerged from, the technical form emerged from, the visual, social meaning emerges from that. And it's the not propriety, not preference, but the dedication to working with the constraints of that material rather than play with it. And play with it's a whole different thing. Really gives it a meaning which is humanly accessible, not specifically feminine, only available to women.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Very much so.
And that's the real thing for I think, folks like me, I've woodworked all my life. Finding a place in contemporary conversations, particularly in the culture that I've been involved in my whole adult life, within the contemporary narratives and conversations is, I just need to step back and say, right on, But it's opportunities like this to listen to the conversation and reduce it to something which is speak to, and it's always been there for your work. So.
Thank you.
You already started to answer the question before, when you started, but my question it's for both of you, is how can this original aspect of quilting patterns be translated into carved or engraved works to create a unified narrative piece? I appreciate how you guys work together to collaborate and do that one right there. And I understand that quilting is a very intimate thing so I'm just wondering how you're able to say, yes, this is what we both want to collaborate on and push forward this idea of incorporating both designs to create a unified piece. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just trying to make sure, just that quilting is so intimate and stuff, that how do we communicate back and forth and pull other people's ideas into the thing. I think some of that is the part of collaboration, and I think for me as a student, I had a professor that made clear lines for me to to show me that an idea of mine is not me, and something I make is not me, and having the separation between myself, my ego, my whatever, and an object or an idea that's outside of me, all of a sudden, if I can separate those two, then I can critically attack an idea or an object or something else without myself being wounded. And it became this weird back and forth, and that's an idea that's really helped me in collaboration, because then everything's on the table, and if I throw something out there and it gets shot down immediately, I'm like, oh, that idea didn't hold weight, you know, or like it couldn't stand up to this, but it wasn't that like my idea couldn't, you know, that my thing didn't, you know, and so that is really helpful, because I think there was a long time where we were just shooting out, what about this, what about that, how about this idea, and I think you can use any medium to talk about any idea, you know, like I think that art has the capacity to do that, and the question of specificity comes when you start to pull in what is this material doing, and how do I have a conversation with it and this other idea I have, and kind of triangulate between the three of them.
That was good. I'm glad you said that. I needed to hear that right now. It's hard to do that separating, very hard. And it's one of the things that I talk about with critique. And what's so valuable about critique in an art degree, it's one of the great things that we do as artists that a lot of other disciplines and areas don't do, right? You put yourself out there, it's so vulnerable. And we try to be nice and kind to each other. But it also teaches you to do that sort of stepping back. And this is you're still, usually the piece is just made and you're still very emotionally wrapped up in it. You know everything that didn't go how you wanted it to, what you do. But then there are also the surprises, you know, the things. But it's and it's hard to learn to do that. To step back and but also, there are times that I'm scared. I'm scared of my ideas. I'm scared to make it work. I'm scared of what it will say about me. I'm scared if people will understand. I'm scared if people will think I mean this instead of that. I'm scared that they might, if the work is subtle enough, that they might think I voted differently than I did. You know, it's that kind of, and I once, I had this moment that really changed my relationship to being an artist, and I had the privilege of hearing Carly Schneemann speak. She's the 70s feminist, or well, not just in the 70s, she remained a feminist artist, but she passed away not that long ago, but she's the one who did the Interior Scroll performance piece where she stood naked on stage and pulled out of her vagina this scroll that had the text on it. It was, anyway, look that up, it's amazing, but I heard her speak later in like 2012. And she talked about that piece, and she talked about her fear. And she said the idea for that piece came to her, and she knew she had to do it, but she did not want to, and she was scared. And I thought, what? That's okay. That's okay? Like, I have to admit, anyway, that was a pivotal moment for me. And then I heard another artist, Americaine, who's a voice, who uses her voice as an instrument. I heard a podcast with her, and she was talking about how she thought she's older, now she's probably, I don't know, anyway, she's passing life, but she was talking about how she thought that, she kept thinking that eventually, after enough time, that fear would go away. As an artist, that fear, but she wouldn't still be scared every time she started something new, but she said it didn't. And so she realized that's part of the process. And then she talked about how there's a shift that happens when the curiosity takes over. The curiosity becomes more powerful than the fear, and then that shift happens. So I've also tried to embrace doesn't come right away. It takes, good things often take a lot of work, hard work, not just the physical labor of making the stuff, which both of our work is related to fairly intense, time-consuming labor, but the mental work of working through it, and even like going from what was a carved line to then be able to stitch that line, that wasn't just, oh, line was carved, now I stitch it, right? There was transition there. And those of you who have worked in a lot of media know you can't just go from one to the other. Things have to be changed so that they fit this other media that you want to work in. So it's all, and that's also about, in collaboration, this too, resilience, right? And transforming ideas and things becoming something else, or if they're not ready yet, they sit on the shelf, or they simmer in the back of the head, of the brain, or in the heart, until they're ready to be something. I hope we.
I also have something. This is for both of you, but BA, since a lot of your students are here, friends, even faculty members, do either of you have advice for the people upcoming artists, or like trying to find their way?
You want me to go?
Yeah, you go first.
Thank you, for that, Faith. I think be open. Take everything in, and also learn to cultivate things that feed you, right? That fuel your creativity. Pay attention to, I watch this stuff, I listen to this stuff, I talk to this people, something gets stirred up. Work with other people. Also, the first idea is not the best idea, or the way that it came to you is not right. Very few times has the first idea that's come to me been what the thing is. And like that idea to put one of those little sewing tables on a wedding dress, like standing on its own, the seeds of that idea came probably 10 years before I made that piece, right? So not rushing things, not pushing things, but just, and having a space in your head, in your heart, in your body, to sort of hold all of these things. And then, like I said, learn to cultivate ways to use them or do something with them. And I will say, after years of doing this, it's gotten easier to collaborate. It's gotten easier to know what to do with my thoughts and my ideas. But it wasn't always that way. That's why it's called practice. Yeah. And read Rilke. Rainer Maria Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet. Read that.
I think I have a little more practical, just jump on that, is that like our society is not built and to value the arts and to honor in a lot of ways. And so like the number of artists who I know who are like significant artists who have to have another gig to support their art is high. So I think this question of like making it or not making it, like I don't know if I would feel like I've made it at this point, like it's just, there's this ongoing question of exterior value to what you're doing that is always going to be in flux and in question. And if you are basing what you want to do on trying to get that value, you're always gonna be like chasing your own tail. And so I think like making peace with what you do and the fact that like you are making to satisfy yourself and because you must as a maker. And like if you can form kind of an interior space between you and your work that is at peace, then that is like crucial and like super valuable, regardless of whether or not this person accepts it or that person says it's good, or this curator or this museum or this, are you getting into these shows or whatever. There's something to be said about that internal space that is crucial to develop ideas, especially if your ideas are things